Wow, let me do that. Evidently because Rob made everybody a co-host. Yeah, well, Rob, do you want to take it away or shall I?
Oh, I've got no preference. I guess I have the first couple things on the agenda, so let me start with
All
that.
you, man.
And cool. All right. So first up here, a couple maintainer updates. First off, as I think we've discussed previously, Mike is stepping down. Huge thanks to everything you've done to get this community up and running. And then I think effective today is what we said. Flynn is now a Gamma lead. So welcome. And also huge thanks because I know you've been very involved for a long time. So yeah, this is a great transition into two very, very instrumental people. So yeah.
Excited to have Flynn step up. So yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Congratulations.
Sorry to see you go. You're leaving a big pair of shoes to fill, as I said in email. So I'm not sure if it's congratulations or but yeah,
Sure, I'll
thanks. I
take it.
appreciate that.
Awesome. Cool. And then I also wanted to highlight that Lior is becoming a conformance reviewer and ingress to gateway reviewer. So he's been taking on increasingly more and more in this project. So just thanks to him for leading so much of this work. And I'm excited to see ingress to gateway moving again. So yeah, really, really excited about this. And just shout out to anyone else on this call or watching later. We do have a contributor ladder. So if you're interested in either taking a formal role or moving to a larger role, definitely reach out to any one of the maintainers. We're trying to encourage new contributors across the board. Yeah. That's all updates I know on that front. But thanks to everyone. Next up, oh, go ahead.
Nah.
Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, the next thing I had was the 080 milestone. I think we've already discussed this last time. I just wanted to make sure we circle back around because realistically, we're trying to get 080 and 1.0 out in between now and October, basically. So it's going to be a pretty accelerated stretch here. And 080 is primarily just Gamma's release. So this is a broader meeting, but the idea is to cover both topics. And so as far as I know, based on our last meeting, we're really just missing docs, which Flynn is going to work on. We said we're going to ping you this week. And so this is the ping.
Yeah, I was going to say, technically, I just agreed to be pinged this week. But yeah, I believe I should be able to tackle that. Things last week were very busy, but now all the KubeCon CFPs are replied to and things like that. So
yeah,
I think I can tackle doc stuff.
Nice.
I will probably, yeah, let me look over things a bit more, and then I'll probably ping a couple of people with some suggestions there, and then we'll go from there.
Great.
Skipping ahead a little bit, I believe I will also be able to handle the blog post. David from HashiCorp reached out already. It would be lovely indeed to have other co-authors. So
if someone wants to reach out to Michael over at Kuma, that would probably be good.
I'm sorry, say again. If someone wants
to reach out to Michael Con Kuma, that would probably be good too.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, just ping me on Slack, drop me an email, whatever. We'll go from there and hopefully be able to handle that asynchronously for a bit.
Cool. And then the other bit was API spec updates themselves. So I think the only thing that we need here is something like on parent ref that says, oh, by the way, this can also be attached to a service. And that's what it means in this context. maybe there's some other Gamma specific guidance that I haven't thought of yet. So definitely ideas welcome there. But, you know, I've been thinking again about this kind of aggressive timeline that we have. And I think that means that, you know, I guess we've kind of discussed this before, but we really should try and have everything wrapped up by the end of this month so we can at least hand it off to reviewers. You know, it does take some time for Tim and Cal, depending on their availability, to actually get through this. But I'm hoping this is a small enough release that we can just actually get it out sometime in July. So yeah, that's what I've been thinking as far as timeline, but I'm open to comments, discussion, whatever on this.
My availability has opened up a little bit recently, so yeah, I think I'll be able to get the paragraph stuff wrapped up hopefully this week, and I'll
Awesome.
take a skim through to see if there's anything else that feels relevant. But also, if anybody else notices, please feel free to ping me.
That is a pretty awesome silver lining. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking this one on. I really appreciate it. Okay, well, I'll hand it back to Flynn or Lior or whoever to take us to our next one.
Looks like Lior has the next couple. So Lior, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I wanted to bring up this app protocol PRs where I think we discussed on this before, where this is the community, although it's Kubernetes, like this is the community to review them. I think this one is laid out for a while, and it has some acknowledgements and improvements here, where we both think that WebSockets and WebSocket Secure should be added. I think Dave's here as well. We've been chatting as well about it. But yeah, I just wanted to know what are the blockers for adding it, and if someone else thinks differently.
Is there anybody who thinks this is a bad idea? I mean, it's hard for me to see a downside personally.
I mean, the only thing we need to make sure is, like, which Dave did a pretty good job proving it, that it's going to benefit not just one implementation of. So this is the reason to be in a standard protocol.
I think it's widely beneficial. I think there's maybe was some questions about websites sticking out previously around like the upgrade handling and how that works. But I think that's more implementation details rather than something that should block this. This seems like a good addition to me.
So I added to the issue here. If you look at like GEP 119, I kind of added a table based on Nick's feedback about app protocol, service port protocol, and also the route type, and whether like if those combinations, how do they match up? HV3 makes things very interesting because it changes the underlying protocol to be over UDP. So then what raises the question sort of for these protocols is like, hey, how technically WS and WSS are strictly like HV1 RFCs. So how do we express, for example, WebSocket over HV2? How do we, or H2? How do we express WebSocket over H3? Does that expand then into like Lior's looking for use cases for like multiple app protocols in a list? Or do we change sort of the WebSocket constants in this PR to include like WS2, WS3? Do you know what I mean? Like it'd be nice to kind of like have a plan and then make the necessary changes.
Is this also following the LPN?
There's a separate issue about ALP and discussion actually about ALPN negotiation and using it, if we can use that for as another component on top of SNI for TLS routing. So I think yeah, I sort of said on that one that seems reasonable that you might use the the fact that you want ALPN negotiation or the results of the ALPN negotiation. Like you can't really have the results of the ALPN negotiation because it has to be negotiated, so it's not available for routing. So like, yeah, like how much can we do there? I don't know. Like, but we should be able to do something with ALPN negotiation, right? Like, and the same. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
And I was gonna say, yeah, like, to be honest, I do think that it's probably worth putting. I think we can put a sort of star on the. It's okay to put unanswered questions in a GEP. It's okay to put, future work in a GEP. It's okay to say HTTP3 is unknown at the moment. What we're doing here explicitly does not say anything about HTTP3. If you want to say something about HTTP3, come back and do another PR. Or something like that. Like I think it's worth, if we need to put that in the out of scope bits at the top, that's fine. But like, or out of scope for now, or proposed future work, like we have a couple of examples in saying it's not that we'll never do this, it's that we're not doing it now because it's hard and we'll come back to it. I think that a lot of stuff about HTTP3 is like that. I mean, I almost think that we might need another protocol value on the listener to say this listener is a HTTP3 one, because that then has implications. But I haven't thought enough about it to be sure that that's what I really think we should do. But so I think that all of that sort of really puts a lot of this into the, into the too hard for right now basket, or the, let's get the bits that we want for the things now in, and mark down HTTP3 things as we know it's important, we will get to it, but not right now, because otherwise we're going to end up stuck having to boil the ocean of HTTP3 support to be able to add functions that are very useful for HTTP 1 and 2 right now.
By the way, is HTTP3 IANA protocol or no?
I can't remember. I think the spec is still draft, but lots of people, like draft IATF specs are, usually accepted as hard currency in most places.
Yeah.
There is definitely, you can look it up at the website, and there is a bunch of stuff about H3 that is registered, but getting a sense of all of that is interesting.
Yeah, it's a very hard bucket because of the layer 4 changes and stuff like that.
As Keith points out, though, RFC 9114 is proposed standard as of last June. So perhaps it will actually be a standard in our lifetimes.
Proposed standard is usually when you start building it, right? Like,
yeah, it's like you said, that is usually a point at which you can consider it hard currency, as you put it. H3 in a lot of ways feels to me like something more immediately relevant to the Ingress side of the Gateway API as opposed to the Gamma side of the Gateway API. I could imagine that changing in the future, but
I mean,
probably not so much right now. It's most of the benefit of HTTP3 is on the Ingress side, not so much the in-cluster side.
Remember, however, that we are co-opting the Gamma meeting today for the general meeting. So that's...
Yeah, well aware. Just pointing that out.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
I think
so that makes it a little bit more interesting too.
The time box it because there are many more things on the agenda. So I think Rob, or anyone else, if you can give you help helping this one merge, because it seems there is a consensus here. But also I think question still remains, also with HTTP2, how do we express, if we want to express WSS on HTTP2 or WS, or for example any protocol. I was thinking to just leave it as what's the ALPN negotiation is, and the community is kind of encouraged using ALPN, but I know there are some implementations that don't use ALPN by default. So I think we have more place for discussion.
Yeah, I haven't said much here, but this feels, WebSocket feels maybe slightly different in that I feel like it's almost always done via negotiation or via upgrade, right? So what does it mean? The way I would interpret this as an app protocol is that we're allowing the upgrade to occur. Like this endpoint supports that, not necessarily that all connections should use WebSocket. Like, and so that feels just a little bit different than what we have so far in app protocol. I think it probably makes sense, but it does change what app protocol means, and it, well, not necessarily what it means, but it's just a slightly different use than we've had before.
Do you think there's a better place to talk about WebSockets? I mean, sorry. Do you think there is a better way to indicate that WebSockets should be expected on a given, a given place?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
This feels reasonable to me where it is. I know Dave had originally proposed something like this. I think was it on HTTP route or was it a policy? I can't remember how you had this originally, Dave.
It as a meta resource describing the back end.
Yeah.
And then you could opt into potential like different protocols. Because like you can have layering or you can have multiplexing. Like that's the hard part about all this, right? Like
yeah. So
I think we
to
should.
Me, go ahead.
You go. No, you go first. I'll go.
Okay. To me, I feel like this specific thing seems to indicate if we move forward with this as an app protocol, we almost certainly need to support a list of app protocols. And if we don't want to do that, we should evaluate others. But it does seem like all the momentum is towards this change plus the list of app protocols. But if anyone has concerns, raise them now, because I think this just pushes us further in that direction.
Are there situations where having a list of app protocols would be useful without WebSocket?
That's a good question.
We think
so. You could specify like gRPC over HCC.
Okay.
There's also
go ahead, Rob.
There's also some of the pain that we've found along this way is there are sometimes implementation specific variations of protocols, like only supporting HTTP2 over TLS and not clear text, and not, there are some weird variations out there that can be expressed this way, as this is one of the things I support.
So I have a follow-up about that, which is, are you expecting the list of app protocols would be ordered or not? And part of the reason that I ask is that one of the things that we did in Emissary Ingress was arranged for an ordered list of protocols where you could say things like, okay, HTTP and TLS, or HTTP and the proxy protocol and TLS, and you could talk about ordering on that. And we found out found out fairly quickly that there were situations where network load balancers didn't all do the same ordering of those protocols. And it is still causing a certain amount of difficulty there. So yeah, that gets to be really interesting.
It is.
And again, this is not something that I think is going to be a problem for inside the cluster. So there are ways that I kind of feel like it makes more sense to attach this sort of thing to an HTTP route than anything else, or some other kind of a route where you get to say, here's a particular path, and this is what we expect on this particular path. But I also suspect that people like Laura and Dave have done a lot more thinking about this than I have. So I am definitely willing to be convinced on this one.
I just want to answer Candace's question about like, why not make a route per protocol? And I kind of have a distinction where I view the existing gateway routes to be external facing and not sort of like the upstream API. Because as an example for Knative, people come out with like new revisions of their software. Let's say they upgrade then from like an HTTP endpoint to a gRPC endpoint. I don't want to have to tear down the Ingress resources in order to then be able to send traffic to the backend on upgrade. That's sort of the big reason
Yeah.
why I think like there's sort of this, they're similar, but they're different. Like,
Are they
I would,
in that Knative case? Are you? That's a case where they would be changing the protocol all the way from the Ingress side back to the back end, right?
so how you would do like upgrading to gRPC is you would just specify the H2C string, kind of like how Istio does it on the port name actually, or the container port, I think is how we do it. But we don't touch the ingress because we know that these protocols are sort of compatible, right? So
Go ahead, Nick.
yeah, so yeah, the way that I would answer that same question is route types are based, we have route types based on how the request should be routed when it reaches the gateway. So that's the sort of determinant that we need to use about whether or not we create a new route type. Is this new route type relevant for how the thing should be routed when it reaches the gateway, not like the capabilities of the backend, right? Like, or what the protocol should be when you talk from the gateway to the backend, right? Like that was one of the reasons I wanted to do the backend property big chunky version earlier, was that you could put a lot of that would be the bucket for this. But in terms of like what would I personally consider new route types for, I would actually consider talking about a HTTP3 route. You know, in that it might be a useful sort of compare and contrast between like, if we did that, would there be any useful gain as opposed to just having a HTTP route and a protocol type on the listener that says you should expect traffic to this listener to be HTTP3 because that implies UDP and blah blah blah. But and so yeah, I don't think we would end up with a HTTP3 route because I suspect that it would end up being 90 to 99% the same as HTTP route, because most of HTTP is not sort of changing a lot of the core concepts of HTTP. You still have headers and methods and stuff like that. It's changing the transport details. And so like we really should be trying to support HTTP3 at the transport layer rather than at sort of the higher level application layer stuff. Layer 4 to 5, not layer 7, to use this slightly flawed OSI model. So I think I just wanted to make clear like how I think of that, and I think that's one of the things that we explained really poorly about the API at the moment. It is on my to-do list of things to fix before we go GA, is to have better explanations about why we have multiple route types and what they're for. But the important thing to remember is that right now the way I think of it and the way I tell it to people is that route types are based off the information you use for routing discrimination. TLS routes are SNI, and that's pretty much it. So when we started talking about like, do we have traffic where we terminate TLS with TLS routes? It's like, you can, as long as you're only using the SNI as the routing discriminator, because then it doesn't violate the TLS route contract. So yeah, I think those that sort of, I wanted to sort of have recorded a response to why would we consider a new route type. Thanks for the question, Candace.
Rob.
Yeah, that's it. Sorry. Yeah, that is a perfect description. I just raised my hand because I realized that we were just finishing this conversation up, and then I open it right back up. So sorry, but I know we do need to time box this, and we have many very interesting items on the agenda. So maybe we can continue this discussion offline on this one.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, let's move on. And if anybody feels really strongly that we shouldn't move on, now is a great time to talk. Otherwise, it's still the order for gateway status.
Yeah. I'll try to follow up with maybe another discussion on this things that we just finished. But yeah, expect to see some traction because people have opinions. So yeah, the next one is about like enhancing the gateway class status API. So both in terms of reporting conformance features, which seems to be not controversial, actually didn't get a lot of responses. But the second one, which is seems to be more complicated, is about like policies or extensions support. So yeah, I wanted to get like a little bit like more thoughts about it, like what people think, For conformance features, pretty simple. Want to be able to visualize for users what conformance features their implementation support. But for policies, it's a bit more complicated. Actually, Flynn, I tagged you on this one. Yeah, it seems that we have a lot of kind of policies. Not all of them actually targets gateways. And I see that I saw that Nick added some thoughts here as well for other kind of resources. So yeah, maybe I'll hand over to Nick.
I couldn't quite tell if Shane's question was for you or for Nick about coexisting with the existing declarative parameters ref, but I thought that was a really interesting question. If one of y'all wants to tackle that too.
Nick, you're muted for a while.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So sorry. The idea here is for me is to make this thing be here's a list of relevant CIDs that you might want to know about that are relevant for this implementation, right? Like that's why it's in status. It's not about, declaring something about the CIDs. It is about the implementation telling you these are CIDs that you might want to use, right? These are the extra CIDs that are not included in the base gateway API set that you might want to support. So thus any CRD that you use for a parameters ref should be listed in this extension, list of extension resources. If you used a config map, then that's not a non-standard resource, so you wouldn't need to use that, right? But the intent here is to give you a way that you can be like, something weird is going on with this implementation. Is there config relevant that I don't know about? kubectl get, go to this thing, API group dot resource name. Okay, -A. Now I can see all of them in the cluster that I have the rights to see or whatever. But the intent here is to sort of take some of the things that Flynn with good reason was complaining about in the parable that about discoverability and help people discover things about the implementation that they're using if they don't know them already, right? Say you're having to go to the implementation stocks website and be like, what resources can I use? Does it have a bunch of custom extension filters? Right now, for example, Envoy Gateway has a bunch of pretty nifty, auth filters and stuff like that, but there's no way for you to know that from the cluster itself. You have to go to the Envoy Gateway website and look up exactly what they are and how to use them and all that sort of stuff. At least this way, you can be like, is there something relevant? I don't know, right? And that's my intent here. Is just that's why it should literally be, a list of, group, kind or resource, and maybe an optional purpose that tells you something about what it's for. Anyway. So yeah, I probably talked enough. Rob, you're next.
Yeah, no, big +1 on everything you're suggesting there. I think it makes sense. I like the idea that you have of some kind of purpose, category, whatever, to describe what that specific kind is being used for. Yeah, I think this is great. Yeah, would love to move forward with it. Yeah, I guess really just to echo what you're saying here, and maybe since this is how I shouldn't open this can of worms, but just I'll throw this out here because this is very much, because it's gateway class centered. This is something that solves Ingress implementation issues and leaves Gamma completely out in the current form of the world. So longer term, we probably need some kind of solution for Gamma. Yeah.
This may actually be the thing that pushes us over the edge towards having a mesh resource or a mesh class resource or something like that, right? Because that would be a useful body of information to capture there.
Yeah, and I think this combined with the other thing Lior had mentioned on gateway class status, what features do you support, is also very relevant for any Gamma implementation, because I imagine it's not going to be 100%. Yeah, cool. Okay, I'll hand it over to Lior.
Yeah, just wanted to ask, what was in mind, in terms of how we keep it synced, how implementation should report it. Say I'm an Envoy Gateway, and then I'm supporting now new policy or new extensions, and am I expected to report right away? All right, I have this, and this is its purpose. In terms of flow, what you have in mind?
So in my mind, this is just it's a must requirement that we can't conformance test for, right? Like, it's just this is going to be an honor system thing. This is going to be you must do this, and we can all sort of be like raise eyebrows at people if they don't, and that's pretty much it, right? Like, it's like it's more intended as sort of very strongly worded guidance for implementations. To say you have to do this so that people will be able to find all the bits that you're making available. In the same way that for conformance features, it's a little better, because I would hope that in the future, if we do the conformance profile stuff correctly, we should actually be able to change the conformance tests such that you point them at a gateway class and it picks which conformance test to run because you've told it which features you support and does those, and then tells you how you did, so that you don't need to sort of specify as part of your test harness like what features to run. You make your thing publish that to its gateway class, and then the tests can understand that, and they can understand what they should be doing and do it. And that way, if you add a new feature, all you got to do is publish it to the gateway class, and boom, your testing infrastructure now will run the conformance test for you. And so that the idea here is, in my mind, the sort of overarching idea behind both of these is to make the gateway class the way in which implementations can record the features and extensions they support, and make that sort of relatively standard, relatively easy to both understand, but also to parse for tooling. Ideally, people should be able to write tooling to look at gateway classes in the cluster and be like, hey, I know that controller name string, that is Cilium. I know that controller name string, that's Contour. And they can make, and they can say, okay, and this Contour installation supports these additional CRDs, and those are the ones that we should be looking for in the cluster, or something like that. It's both useful for users in the sense that they need to type kubectl, but it also gives the possibility for people to write tooling to help you do that automatically. And again, Flynn, I'm sort of leaning heavily on what would Flynn do here, just to be like, users, like we want users to be able to use this thing without hating us as the people who wrote the spec, right? Like, we want people things should be discoverable. They should be easy to discover. It's a complicated spec with a lot of bells and whistles and knobs. We want to make it so that all of those bells and whistles and knobs are discoverable inside the cluster without going anywhere else. Is sort of my overarching my overarching goal
Yep.
here.
Yeah.
If we do
Right.
if we do things that result in the users screaming, and what was Shane's? I think Shane described it as throwing monkey feces at us afterwards. That is to be avoided. We really, really want
exactly.
to not be in that situation.
Yes. Yeah. So I think the but the key part for the extension, the list of extensions, is that's not going to be tool enforceable. That's going to be an honor system and effectively extremely strongly worded guidance, rather than something that we can actually check in any way other than having a person go and actually install it and be like, hey, you forgot you forgot an extension or something like that.
You could conceivably write a test that installs the controller and then looks over at CRDs and make sure that all the CRDs there are mentioned, but that doesn't seem like it's likely to really work well in the long term.
Yeah, and it doesn't solve the problem of this controller supports the controller
Maybe it
supports
wasn't.
maybe it wasn't
Shane with that particularly colorful moniker, but anything else on this one? Just in interest of time, it definitely seems like everybody likes the idea of extending gateway class to do this sort of thing, and then finding a way for Gamma to take advantage of it. I kind of feel like Nick's suggestion of just listing groups and kinds or groups and resources, and that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Maybe I'll have a couple of follow-ups, but I'll do it offline.
Cool.
Clear, thanks.
And with that, I guess it's over to Nick.
Yep. So I finally opened APR to roll in the changes that we talked about. Oh, people have commented that I hadn't noticed. So I haven't read those yet. But yeah, the intent here is to sort of fold in the parallel that Flynn wrote as part of the GEP 2014, and to sort of talk about what that leads us to conclude, how possible ways things we need to think about when trying to solve this discoverability problem, and then include sort of proposed solutions. Now, a couple of things that are important here is if you keep going down, Rob, if you're driving, yeah, cool. These are this is listing the problems, this part, and then if you keep going down, then I do actually include like, here are the things that we should have as solutions. However, there's a solution cookbook. There are some things where I'm like, I don't think there'll be any objection here. So some of that is already added. If you could just go back up a little bit, Rob, I just want to hit the first one, the one about the label. So the standard label on CRD objects is actually supposed to be already done. That is actually part of the spec already. It was just a little bit hard to find.
Good to
So you had to
call it
sort of know you look. Yeah. So this one calls that out. And then the other thing that I wanted to call out here is that I've added this like design consideration section to each of these solution things to sort of say a little bit about, hey, if you're going to do this, you need to be careful about API server fan out, or this seems like a no-brainer, or some other sort of concept here. So I've got like this the idea of having a standard status condition. I don't think that one seems would be very controversial to me. Like if something is affected by a policy at all, there is a condition that says affected by a policy, right? Like if it has conditions. If it doesn't have conditions like secret, then there is a standard annotation that you put on there instead. That is just an escape hatch for core things that we can't update and won't be updated to have status. And then if you keep going down, there's a few more ones further down where they are sort of, I've put this solution is in progress and so is not binding yet. That's the extension types listing that we were literally just talking about. And then having a standard status stanza that lists all of the policies that are in effect on a particular object, if we control the status and can do that, that has big fan out problems. And so I've got an example there of what it might look like, but there's a bunch of stuff here saying, this is experimental, don't use this yet. You need to think about it. We need to talk about it in this gap. And so I tried to sort of be very clear here about which bits are in progress and which bits aren't. And some of these I expect that we will talk about as part of the gap, and then sort of either remove them from the gap or mark them as like we didn't put them in alternatives considered or something like that. So the intent here is to sort of make it very clear when you're reviewing this, which bits are sort of up for discussion, like I think are up for discussion, and which bits are sort of seem to me to be complete no-brainers that we should just do. Also, a couple other things that I would call out here. So that one was based on a suggestion from Tim as part of one of the API reviews. Rob and I have talked about it before. Again, I've tried to write the bit down below the bit of like, this requires a gap of its own, as though it was like a mini gap, and to sort of give you an idea about what I think the gap would look like. But it's not binding because we haven't agreed yet, right? Like, and even if we merged it today, it would still be marked as this is not binding yet because we haven't agreed, right? So I'm trying to make it so that we have a way to avoid the problem that we had with overall policy attachment, where people started using it before we had all sort of finished working on it. And so I'm trying to manage that problem here from the outset. In terms of what else to call out, I think those are the main things. I tried to. The things are, there's a couple of ideas that are a bit wild, like having a validating admission controller that tells you if your thing is affected by a policy. But so I just wanted to throw a whole bunch of ideas in there so that we could talk about them in this PR. I have sort of the other thing that I've done as part of this that is going to come up in another discussion that I've got listed there is that I talked to Flynn about this, but I changed the names of the people from Julian and Jane to Charlie and Anna, with the intent being that we should give standard names to our personas. We'll talk about that in a minute. The last thing is that other site source references doc, policy attachment, currently duplicates like most of the policy attachment get, and also gives policy attachment maybe an appearance of being more more stable and less experimental than it actually is. And so this is one of the primary contributors to the state that policy attachment has ended up in. And so I have removed this and pointed us off to the main gap. So tried to sort of make it like clear that this thing is not ready yet, and you can see in the gap that it is provisional or whatever. So anyway, that's all I sort of have to say there. Please go and review it and give me comments on it. I am going to be, after this week, I'm going to be on leave for 3 weeks. So I don't think that this is in a huge rush. So, I wanted to give it time, have people time to think about it. If you want to get some comments in that I can respond to before the end of this week, go ahead. But I don't consider this like critical for 080 or anything that's happening in the next few weeks. So I thought it was probably okay to open it now, leave it to percolate for a bit, and then when I come back, I'll start making notes about it.
I definitely like that better than waiting another 4 weeks to open it.
Yes.
I think it might be nice to get the change to the policy attachment document in sooner than a month from now. The one that's, removing most of it and pointing back to a gap. But
Okay, I can split that up. Yeah.
yeah, I think that would be a nice thing.
Okay.
I just modified the meeting notes to note that I'm going to close GEP 2014 as superseded by Nick's work here. Thank you, Nick. Much appreciated. I still have concerns, but this at least covers a lot of the things that I'm most concerned about. So, yeah. I'm going to mangle your name. I'm sorry. Guilherme?
Sure, no worries, but you can call me just Guy. So,
How
Nick,
do you actually pronounce your name, though?
Guilherme.
Guilherme. Thank you.
Yeah, that is perfect. So, Nick, the comment you saw on the PR is from Craig Brooks, and I think I can speak on his behalf because we were literally just speaking about that like an hour ago. And I think the point he's raising there is it relates to a situation that we often find ourselves in, maybe because we are not implementers of Gate API in the same sense of other implementations that actually provide gateways and the actual workload for the APIs. But we are nevertheless providing custom controller for policies, right? So implementation for policies, effectively leveraging existing gateway implementations, right? So that is the main idea. And we often, whenever we see things such as, updating the status stanza of a resource, right? We always wonder, what we can do, in this kind of situation, because we clearly we would have multiple different controllers trying to update the same resource, right? So, yeah.
So, I think there's definitely some spec work that we probably need to do here to make that clear. But in general, it's supposed to be sort of a Boolean, like something's affecting this. I think that we might need to have some guidelines in here to say, hey, if you're trying to set it to true, something else has already set it to true, just leave it alone, right? Like, the important part here is to say some policies affecting this, go look for the policy, right? Like, this is a slightly unusual thing for a condition because it's generally expected that you won't coordinate on one condition in Kubernetes. Like, conditions are supposed to be namespace to avoid that sort of thing. However, I kind of also want to avoid ending up with like implementation specific policy affected conditions. So you might end up with like 6 different affected by this implementation's policy. It is a nice little bit of extra information, but it also dilutes the sort of tool utility of being able to say some policies affecting this, go and look for them, right? Like, so I think that it's probably, I'll have a think about that and see if I can, change the wording a little bit to make that clearer. But in my mind, that's what it is. Like, it's just that we need to have a thing there saying, if you're going to try and update this and it's already present with the status set to true, then just leave it alone, right? Like, don't, you'll need to have a special check in your contingent checking logic, unfortunately, that that doesn't that just checks. You really need to check the observed generation, the type, and the sort of the reason and message and stuff like that. And we'll need to be very specific about reasons, and then say ignore the message or something like that. Like, we'll need to sort of be very specific about condition checking logic for this specific condition, I think, unless there's some other way around this. Rob?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there. This is more of a meta level comment here. What what Guy described as kind of a policy controller sounds very interesting. So if you have any docs or anything you can link us to, I'd love to see what this looks like, how it works, etc. Because it's kind of an area that I'm kind of blind. I don't know much about, but I'd love to see a different. Yeah, cool, awesome. Thanks for the link.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all of us were going, oh, wait, what is that exactly? We want to see that.
The quadrant. Yeah, so basically we are implementing functionalities such as rate limiting, global rate limiting, and authentication authorization, also multi-cluster gateway consistency through gateway API policies and policy attachment, obviously. And while relying on existing proper gateway API implementations. For example, we spot that we have Istio, for example, delivering gateway API functionalities. So we reconcile our policies, configuring the underlying Istio deployment. If not Istio, all the gateway API implementations. Next one on the list is Envoy Gateway, for example.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I think overall, I'd just like to add that we see that our first impression of your PR is very, very positive, just like pretty much everything that you guys have been doing. I think Craig's point there is it's only about raising the awareness about this older persona that might be sometimes also part of the picture there.
Importantly, I actually added a persona. I want to add a persona as part of this called policy admin. Mental note for myself, I actually need to give that that person a name, if we all agree that they should have names. But yeah, so the idea there is to sort of give I've actually got an update to the diagram as part of that, the sort of canonical, here is the hierarchy of gateway API resources with the policy admin sort of poking off to the side and affecting everything, because that's really what happens. So that's sort of where that one is at. I think we should definitely time box this one. We could talk a lot longer about this, but I would rather have a lot of more of these conversations on the PR so that there's more history. And as I said, the more that we can have these conversations on the PR, the more I have a to-do list when I get back from leave. Okay, so I'm going to move on to my next one, which is, like I said, giving personas names. I'm proposing here that yes, that we give our personas standard names, and that we give them names that are sort of reflective of the initial letter of the name of the current persona. So Ian would be infrastructure admin, Charlie would be cluster admin, and the application developer would be Anna. With the intent being that, just it gives us a shorter hand to do this, it makes it easier to understand what these people might be. So please have a look at that. Comments, votes, etc. Welcome. The idea here is to start up this discussion so that when I get back, I can open an actual gap and then make it happen.
He notes that we're down to 10 minutes, which is a good point. I absolutely 100% think that the personas need to have names in order to be personas as opposed to abstract descriptions. And it makes me sad to get away from all the J names, but like Jane, but that's okay. I think I can support this proposal.
Yep. The other one is, I suspect, maybe more controversial. I was thinking the other day about people have been complaining since I've been talking about Gateway API about how hard it will be to write a Helm chart that automatically drops a HTTP route in your cluster that just works. And so here is like a bit of a straw person argument about this is a thing where if we did it, it would be a recommendation for sort of a conventional name and sort of a rough set of expectations around a gateway that would be like the default or something like that. So, implementations could provide this as part of their install, or they could, or an administrator could create this as part of their install, and then people writing Helm charts can sort of expect that they can target the internet gateway in the default namespace and have HTTP routes, but probably work, right? Like the intent here is just to sort of cut a couple of those layers of like, oh, now I've got to go and find out like what gateway I need and which namespace it's in, and like a bunch of stuff like that. And if the route is allowed and a few other things like that to sort of give a slightly easier on ramp to sort of trying this thing out, where maybe you don't control the gateways, where you are Anna and not Charlie. So yeah, Leo, you were first.
Yeah, just curious, like, is this like, did you get his feedback? Like, where did you get his feedback? It's interesting because, like, I mean, we can develop this.
Probably from a bunch
Yeah.
of people named Anna.
Yeah, basically. I mean, but from people who are sort of like, I like the idea of the API, but one of the things that I liked about Ingress was that you could, if you're installing an app, you can just include an Ingress and be pretty confident that it'll probably work, right? Like, and right now you can't do that with Gateway API because there's no conventions, there's no sort of places to have any of this standard stuff. And so that's the idea here is not, I put a suggestion, like a proposal in there because I wanted to have something concrete to discuss rather than just let's talk about this. It's much easier to have people be like, that's a rubbish idea and here's a better one than for us all to argue about what a good idea is, right? Like, yeah. So yeah, John.
Yeah, I can probably only provide the first part of that statement. That I really like the idea, and I think Costin, who is on vacation, would be jumping to hear this because he's talked about this many, many times. I kind of hate the idea though of the kind of standard gateway. Like, we shouldn't be encouraging kind of default namespace usage.
Do you hate the idea of the possibility of
No, not the possibility.
or
the
do you hate
implementation.
the way this particular one is written down?
Yeah, this particular one. So I think there's potentially better ways we could do it. I don't have any good ideas offhand. This one just makes me really uneasy to like say that we're encouraging kind of this default namespace gateway. I don't think that's really a good practice. And it's like allowed routes, all namespaces maybe is not necessarily best practice either.
If you're, yeah, I mean, you should always, this feels like a thing where a given implementation should be allowed to not provide it and clearly document that. But yeah, if you're an app developer as opposed to if you're Anna instead of Charlie, then this really could make your life a whole lot easier in some ways. So
yeah, I would
Shane
say
is
like an
asking if we have specific
implementation.
end users. Yeah.
An implementation shouldn't be providing gateways at all, in my opinion. That's for the user. I mean, like in my mind, if we were to do something like this, where we say, I want to just deploy a HTTP route without worrying about where it goes, a more suitable method would be kind of like what Ingress does, right? Where you have a default Ingress class. Like we have now 2 layers, we have gateway class and gateway. But in theory, you could say if there's no parent ref, it goes to the global default parent ref. That may be also concerning, but that feels a bit more intuitive to me. Like I like the idea of unset means default rather than we have this canonical name that maybe or maybe not someone follows. Because if it's just this kind of fuzzy canonical name, then every Helm chart is going to need to provide the ability to override it anyways. And then if someone doesn't do that, then they just provide the hard-coded internet default one. Then power users who are not using default namespace are going to be upset with all the Helm charts, etc. I don't know. This is all off the cuff, so I think it's a good idea. It probably is worth discussing more.
Shane?
I actually agree with John's statement that I don't think that users should be just having gateways by default and stuff like that. And yet I also have the use case that tells me that it can't be so. So we have both a gateway operator, which dynamically creates gateways, which we would consider the best way to basically use Gateway API. But we have our classic Ingress controller with Gateway API support, which does it in what we called a, what did we call it? A non-provisioning mode or something like that. There's been several issues on this. And so this is actually helpful. So I actually see the use case, even though I hate it.
Yeah, so again, a large part of what I'm trying to do here is just to draw out the discussion and to actually have a discussion about this and not sort of let it fester as a thing that no one is thinking about or doing anything about. I actually don't care if this specific proposal I have there, it doesn't happen. Like the, like all I wanted to do was start off the conversation and sort of say, hey, I have literally got feedback when I have presented at this at sort of non-KubeCon places and sometimes even at KubeCon, I had got feedback like, nice API, but how the hell am I going to use it in a Helm chart? How's it going to fit in a Helm chart? Right? Like, that is the extent of the use case, right? Like, nice API, but how's it going to fit in a Helm chart? Right? Like, and that's the sort of and that's the sort of things that I just think we need to think about, right? Like, if it doesn't turn out to be this, like, even if we have a convention or something like that that says, if the sort of default expectation is that there's going to be a gateway somewhere that's called this, right? Like, or the gateway class is called this, and we do have a sort of default parent ref thing, like John was talking about. That would be fine, right? Like, but the intent here is to make it so that right now you can include an ingress in a Helm chart and have a reasonable expectation that something will happen, right? Like, as long as the ingress contract is fulfilled somewhere in the cluster, right? Like, you can't do that with Gateway API, like, for some good reasons, but also we need to sort of have a way to let people say, I want this whole thing to be magic, right? Like,
Yeah, we have to have it. Like, we have to have a way that people can kind of compose it in that way. They have to be able to say, okay, I'm bundling my application in with its gateway and its routes, ship it all as one big Helm chart.
yeah. So yeah, this is what I mean. Like, this is the exact discussion that I wanted to have. I would encourage everybody to please go and write your comments on the thing. I will not be offended if you say, having a gateway in a default namespace is a terrible idea and you should feel bad. It's fine. Like, I'm, my skin is thicker than that now. So, like, do that. Like, that's fine. Like, again, the intent here is to sort of have a discussion so that we can try and get this to a state where we write a gap at the end of the day that says, if you want things to be magic, here's what you do. And even in the absence of that, we should provide guidance for people who want to write a Helm chart that includes Gateway API things as to how that Helm chart should handle if you want to have a HTTP route or something like that, right? If you want to have a HTTP route, what should your HTTP route say, right? Like, what value should you provide? Should you error out if people don't provide it, or or something like that, right? Like, or say, hey, if you don't provide these values and you're using Gateway API, it's not going to work, right? I don't know, but like, the intent here is just to sort of raise these things and have us talk about them.
Yeah, I think at the very least, a page of best practices for packaging Gateway API and Helm chart would be super, super valuable. What we put in that, we can all debate, and I'm sure we all have lots of opinions, but the concept is very important, I think. And the earlier the better too, so we get some consistency.
Just one last note about it. Like, it'll be useful to understand like all those things and people for the use cases, because like it depends how much we want to invest on it. So like, you could write helpers that validations in Helm. Like, there's a lot of magics you can do in Helm to help the people do onboard and take it forward, but it depends how much we want to invest on it.
I mean, to be clear, I think that we should be very light touch to start with. Exactly the opposite to what Flynn is joking about in the chat. Like, we should be very light touch to start with, and just sort of be like, we suggest that you do this, right? Because it doesn't take much of a suggestion for a suggestion to become a convention, right? Like, and that's all we need here, right? Like, the most stuff that we could get by here with having a set of conventions about like the ways that you would handle this particular thing, right? Like, and that's all I really kind of want, like, is just to have some conventions to say, if you want to do that, you should do it like this. There's and that's sort of the point of opening this discussion. So anyway, I know that we've gone a long time on this. We're probably close to out of time, but yeah,
we are in fact at -1 minute. At -1 minute. I was gonna say, I would strongly encourage everybody to go and take a look at the things that Rob has listed under triage, but I think we're going to have to pick those up next time. I actually am particularly interested in the TLS from gateway to backend thing, because that feels like it has really been lingering for
a journey.
long time. Yeah,
it's been a journey.
So I'll be taking a look at that shortly soon, and I think that is it, unless anybody has any horribly urgent things they want to jump in on. Going once, going twice. No, let's really not create a Helm replacement. All right, thanks much, everybody. We'll see y'all next time. Take care.
See ya.